This summer, after repeated requests from my parents, I finally cleaned out some boxes that were sitting in my room. And I ran across this gem from first grade. Now, I do remember loving cereal, and I'm still a big fan to this day. However, I don't remember articulating that first sentence. I like to write words. I thought about how, at the mere age of 6, I instructed my teacher to specifically fill in that blank with that phrase. And it struck me because it's true. I've always had a special affinity towards words. I have been moved by the words of Rupi Kaur. I have found identity in the poetry of Khalil Gibran. I have found solace in the lyrics of Lauryn Hill. And I have found myself in my own writing. Whether I've been reading or writing, literacy has gifted me the vocabulary I need to understand myself and my world. But literacy has an even more fundamental purpose. It is the single most powerful tool you and I possess outside of good health. Without it, couldn't do much. I wouldn't be standing here today. I wouldn't be able to fill out job applications. I wouldn't be able to write emails. I wouldn't be able to read my prescriptions. I wouldn't be able to pay that parking ticket from last month. It is everything to our dignity, and it is everything to our daily lives. Yet in this country today, we are dealing with a massive literacy crisis. And this is not a crisis that just popped out of the blue. This is a very deliberate theft. Think about it this way. If we consider many crimes in this country, many of them involve taking something away from someone. Robbery is a theft of something physical. Assault is a theft of dignity. Murder is a theft of life. There is a theft that has been happening in our country for centuries, yet it has never been prosecuted before. The last time we measured it in 2003, we found that 32 million Americans have been robbed of this. That is 1 out of every 7 adults. And I argue that this theft is no accident. If we take a better look at who exactly is functionally illiterate in our country, we see that although Blacks and Latinos make up 24% of our population, they comprise 59% of those considered functionally illiterate. There's something much bigger happening than just saying there's a bunch of people in our country who cannot read. And that's why I'm here today. We do have a literacy crisis, but more importantly, we have a literacy theft. And let's just cut to the chase here. Literacy is about power. And we know that people of color in our country have continuously been denied the opportunities they need to secure power. I'm not the first to articulate this, but I want to argue that literacy must be a fundamental right in our country, that it should be a crime for an American to not have the access to resources and the opportunities they need to secure power. I want to talk more about this theft by delving deep into one American city. I had the great privilege of being a teacher in Detroit, Michigan. I was teaching middle school and high school math, and although every teacher will say this, my kids were truly the greatest. I love teaching and I miss it every single day, but there were some things that made teaching and learning incredibly difficult at our school. First and foremost, I had no curriculum whatsoever. This means I spent my waking hours making up every warm-up test, worksheet, homework, quiz, project, or frantically doing Google searches for those materials. Then one day, I figured out that if I paid about $400 online, I would be able to get an entire set of curriculum. And I had a tiny savings account at the time, so at the time I just bit the bullet and went ahead and bought the curriculum, but no teacher should ever be subjected to that, especially considering what they get paid today. The second thing that was happening is a lot of my kids were learning English as a second language. A lot of my students were arriving from the war in Yemen, and some of them couldn't write their first name in English. And so some days, instead of doing math, they were working on the alphabet. We had one ESL teacher for the entire building, and although she was phenomenal, she literally had hundreds of kids on her caseload. That, combined with that lack of curriculum, there was just no way that my kids were going to become fully literate. And you can forget about any chance of them becoming bilingual. The other challenge was the result of this happening over years and years. I had kids who were in school for at least a decade and still couldn't write an entire paragraph. Yet these kids would come to me and say, "Miss, I'm interested in a career in law or education or art or graphic design or engineering or medicine." They had dreams, and they had more grit than anyone I knew. But what they fundamentally did not have were the very basic opportunities to become literate. And when I'm talking about those opportunities, I really am talking about the very basic things. I'm not talking about that they don't have enough AP classes. I'm saying that in the wealthiest, most powerful nation on the planet, we have kids that walk into classrooms that look like this, where they start their days by picking up rodent feces off the floor, where classrooms are home to mice and puddles of water that have accumulated from ceilings, where teachers are buying toilet paper with their own money, where classrooms are unbearably hot or cold, that you find thermometers in classrooms that read 90 degrees like this one. They are so exhausted from the heat that we have reports of kids who are vomiting in school. And even if they manage to ignore all of this, the reality is that the things that they need to read, books, are virtually non-existent. We know that sometimes we find 3 kids huddled over one book in class, and that they're learning history from a book printed in 1991 when Bill Clinton was president. Now, this is unconscionable. And we know that teachers are humans too. These conditions are unsustainable. They're going to flee. In Detroit today, we have a massive teacher shortage. It's so bad that at one school last year, the highest performing 8th grader ended up teaching his own math class. I could go on, but the question for me and for you is this: would we ever allow this to happen to our own kids? The answer is obvious. So, how do we allow this to happen to other people's kids? We allow this because we allow these systems, structurally racist systems, to continue to exist. It is critical to understand what legal scholars like Michelle Alexander and Khaled Beydoun have repeatedly made clear to us, that racism never disappears, it just conforms to the norms of our times. And the system in Operation Detroit today is very complicated with an equally complex history. So if you remember one thing about Detroit's educational system, it's this: that democracy has largely been decimated in that city. In 1999, the state of Michigan took over Detroit's schools and has been largely running them since then. This means that Detroiters have had no publicly elected school board, no way to control how money has been spent, and very little voice in how their kids are being educated. Now, this system of state takeover, mind you, is the exact same system that was used in Flint, which still doesn't have clean water as I speak. The state takeover has been disastrous for our schools, which is exactly why, exactly 1 year ago, students in Detroit sued the state of Michigan, claiming that their right to literacy has been denied. The state responded with this: that literacy is important, but there's a lot of other things going on. That poverty is getting in the way, that these kids are traumatized, that their parents aren't involved enough, and my favorite, that they have intellectual limitations. This argument is deeply offensive. It suggests that poor kids or kids just going through stuff don't deserve the opportunities they need to become literate, that these are throwaway kids, that they don't need literacy because we don't need them participating in our democracy or in our society, that these factors are too much to handle. And while we shouldn't expect schools to single-handedly fix poverty, we also shouldn't be throwing our hands up in the air and saying, I guess they just won't read. We would be livid if someone talked about our own kids that way. And the thing is, we know what it takes to get a kid to read. This is a solvable crisis. When I was doing my master's in language and literacy last year at Harvard, I learned that we know a lot about reading. The research and the practices, they're largely there. But this willingness to ensure that all kids, despite their circumstances, this willingness to make sure that they get what they need to be able to read, it's just not there. But because this is a crisis and not just some freak natural accident, there are some things we can do about it. First, we must change those systems. The literacy lawsuit in Detroit is a massive step forward in ensuring this fundamental right to literacy in our country. This case needs to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and you can support it and follow it at this website, detroit-accesstoliteracy.org. Second, we have to change public opinion. We have to make it enormously clear to ourselves and to everyone around us that, yes, indeed, we live in a racist society, that literacy is tied to power, and that power has been carefully engineered in this country, and that people of color have been largely excluded from access to power. So if we want to understand literacy, we have to understand our history with power and our current relationship with it. Third, we have to hold ourselves and everyone around us accountable. What I see a lot in education is this generous spirit to give schools free stuff, to sponsor them, to support our teachers. That is all well and good. And if you have the means to do it, please do. However, this is an accountability issue. It's one thing to say, man, this is so awful that you're going through this. Let me help you out. Let me put a Band-Aid on it. Let me give you this box of beautiful books. And it's a whole nother thing to say, hold up, what the hell is going on? How is it possible that in the United States of America, we have kids in schools that look like this? Who is in control here? How are schools being funded? What exactly are my votes doing? What people I vote in, what are they voting on too? It takes a massive amount of education to answer these questions, and they may vary from state to state and district to district. But hopefully those questions can start leading us to action. But we have to be careful here. We must not fall into the trap of thinking that Detroiters need us to be their saviors. The reality is, Detroiters have been fighting for a very long time. They've been organizing, they've been voting, they've been advocating, and they've won some pretty decisive victories as a result. To be most effective in this, we must partner with communities like Detroit and truly deeply understand these systems at work and understand maybe what our role may be in dismantling them. It may require that we go home and talk to our families and make sure that they're just as educated as we are about this. It may require that we go to every rally and protest and make sure there's strength in numbers. And it may require that we simply pass the mic over and make sure that their voices are heard. I want to close by sharing what a student in Detroit told me last month. He said that he knows all of this is happening because it was in the blueprints of our country. And I couldn't agree more. But the thing about a blueprint is that it can change. And together, we can change the way power is accessed in our country by changing the way literacy is accessed in our country. And in the words of W.E.B. Du Bois, the burden belongs to the nation, and the hands of none of us are clean if we bend not our energy to righting these great wrongs. Thank you.